With me today is Lisett Luik, co-founder of Arbonics, a platform working to build the new forest economy, using a data-led approach paired with forest knowledge to create high-quality carbon credits. Lisett, welcome to Say Hi to the Future.
Hi, and thank you for having me.
So I love a little bit about backgrounds before jumping in. So you grew up and you now live in Estonia, but you've traveled a bit. You've studied economics and poli-sci at London School of Economics and Yale, been out to San Francisco. Tell us a bit about those travels and how you got around the world like that.
Yeah, when I was 16, 17, I got itchy feet, I think, as many young people do, and I ended up going to boarding school in the UK. I got a scholarship to do that, which I was meant to just go for 1 year, but I actually loved it. I ended up staying in the UK for 10 years in the end. So it became a second home for me and still is to today. And from there, I think the rest just followed. I kind of got into startups while I was still doing my undergraduate degree at London. My job took me a lot to Asia. I spent a lot of time in China, India, Vietnam.
Wow.
And then I later went on to the US to do my master's degree. And then with a long journey, eventually 12 years later, came back home to Estonia.
Very nice. And how'd you like being at home?
I do like it. Yeah, it's good. I think the beauty of living abroad for a while is the beauty, and the sad part of it is you always have multiple homes, but then you always miss another place. And
Yes.
there is something I quite like that, many places where you feel at home, but it does come with the downside of always missing something or someone.
So we're going to get into the new forest economy, but there's one other thing that really struck me. You translated Keith Richards' autobiography, Life, into Estonian. How do you get that?
Yeah, that was actually very funny. This was the summer between finishing high school and before I started in university in London. And as many students, I needed money, I needed a job. So I was pretty good at English. I was fluent. I went to, boarding school for England in England for 2 years, and I just done one of my A levels in English literature and got like top marks. So I had good, I guess, credentials on English language, and I needed money and I needed a job. And in the meantime, I think I heard about it through my dad. They were looking for this
Hmm.
translator, so I just thought, why not apply? Surprise, surprise! Actually, got the job. Um, it was a really fun experience. I learned the names of a lot of drugs that I had literally never heard of before. I had to
There you
come
go.
up with names for them, but also
You're
learned a lot
expanding
about
your
music.
vocabulary. That's always
Yeah,
good.
exactly. Sounds like the 70s were quite a wild time for the Rolling Stones.
Okay. So, back to the main topic. What is a new forest economy to start?
Yeah, I guess to start and explain that, I may have to backtrack a little bit. So, as you
Sure.
mentioned, I'm from Estonia. I grew up in Estonia. Estonia is 50% covered in forests,
Hmm.
and we have been described as forest-loving pagans, which I think is pretty accurate. We celebrate weird pagan holidays and love to go to the forest on the weekends for fun. That's very Estonian. But basically, what that means is when I came back to Estonia after 12 years, I was working for an investment firm. One of the assets where we were investing in was forest land. This investment firm also had a big climate focus. So we were also investing in a lot of kind of technologies for the energy transition. But the forest investments, when we started looking into it, forestry investments have still been done the same way that they were being done in the 19th century, which was, very based on timber. Um, Even the way you measure forests is still done in the same way. Somebody goes there with a measuring tape and kind of counts the trees in a circle around them and measures them. So it's very analog. But because we were working for an investment firm that had a climate focus, we started thinking about all the benefits that the forests provide, and we thought that timber is really just one of them. And you have carbon, you have biodiversity, you have the social value of that place where all the Estonians go to hide from each other. And so we thought, there must be a better way to bring that value home to landowners. Because if you only have one way for them to realize the value, which is sell the timber, the
Hmm.
behavior you're incentivizing is just always timber harvest. And sometimes that makes sense. But if that's the only path available to them, then there will be some suboptimal decisions being made. So we wanted to give landowners more options, and in the process, support forests and keep the benefit that they provide to society going.
So, what are some of the options that you can provide to a landowner?
Yeah. So the first thing we really started working on is how do we translate the carbon removal benefit that the forests are providing into some actionable result for the landowner? Because again, often that's one of their primary assets. And so as much as we might say, all landowners should just put their forests into conservation, never touch them, in real life, people have bills to pay and children to educate. And so that's not an option. But we started looking at how do we translate the carbon benefit into something actionable. And that's when led us to the voluntary carbon markets and carbon credits. And what it really comes down to is, we know that we need to be removing carbon from the atmosphere. We're emitting 50 gigatons every year of carbon equivalent, and we're removing 2. So that's not a great ratio.
Right.
But that 2 is almost entirely done by nature and entirely done by forests. And we really think that can be scaled up if you provide the right incentives. So this is how we started Arbonics and started finding ways to incentivize the landowners to plant new forests and keep their existing ones growing so that they could remove more carbon.
So, I understand the social benefit to it, but financially, who pays for carbon removal?
I think that's a good question because exactly as you say, it's a sort of social benefits, it's a public benefit. And historically, what's been backing this is the voluntary carbon market. So that's basically companies saying, I want to contribute to the environment. Back in the day, they would call it offsetting. Now they probably don't really talk about offsetting anymore. Now it's more about compensating and supporting nature. But so, yeah, it's companies like Microsoft, they will invest in carbon removal as a way to complement their strategy of like trying to reduce their own carbon footprint, and trying to, I guess, for a company, it's not just about building a better future. It's kind of making sure that there's still a planet that they can do their business on. So there is quite a capitalist motive behind it if you really dig in as well.
So a large company or a company, but probably more to the large side, decides that one of its reinvestment avenues would be carbon offset through reforestation or building new forests.
Yeah, pretty much. And again, I mentioned Microsoft. I bring them as an example because they're quite a large company. Most people have heard of them.
Yeah.
So back in 2020, I believe Microsoft set their decarbonization pathway and, had really aggressive goals for reducing their carbon footprint. And alongside that, they committed to not just reaching net zero, but also removing all the carbon they had emitted historically. Now, this is a very, very challenging thing to do, especially in the years since then. AI has emerged as a big thing, and actually, Microsoft's carbon footprint has increased rather than decreased. But what that has led them to do is precisely like invest in different solutions to remove carbon, and they invest in not just nature. That's one path. But also in technology-based carbon removal and other things, alongside things like renewable energy. So they are still reducing their footprint. It's not a get out of jail free card. Buying carbon credits doesn't mean you get to keep polluting. You still have to, as a primary goal, you have to reduce your footprint, but it is a way to supplement that strategy. And so, yeah, they've been one of the big investors, for example, supporting forests in the US, in Brazil, hopefully in Europe eventually. So I think that's a good case study to explain it.
I'm getting into the details because I'm really trying to understand the economics of it. How does somebody who owns, I don't know, 100 acres, 1,000 acres in Estonia get money from a Microsoft? Is this through a government? Is a government in the middle? Is a private public partnership? How does that work?
So this is where the company that I co-founded, Arbonics, comes to play. We're precisely that bridge between the
Okay.
landowner on the ground and big companies. So, for example, someone who owns 100 acres, or I'll use hectares because we use
Sure.
hectares internally, but it's about 2.5 acres to a hectare. So the landowner who has that land, historically, let's say it's empty land. So their choices might be they can invest today to plant a new forest, but that will take 50 to 80 years for that investment to come home. And when it does, it's a big payoff, lots of timber, huge payoff. But given that the average age of these landowners is 65, a 50 to 80-year investment horizon is frankly something that, they're not motivated to engage in because they don't believe they'll see the results. And so for them, carbon is a great way to make it more attractive. So because if they invest today to plant that forest, if they have to wait for timber, they wait 80 years. But if they get carbon credits, they don't get anywhere near as much money. It's much smaller amounts. It comes much faster. And it's a more recurring cash flow. So that's the landowner's interest. It helps them fund the initial planting and helps them sort of take that step. And then we step in as Arbonics. So we have built a data and tech-based platform, which we use to first make sure that, is this land even suitable for planting? Because you shouldn't just be going around sticking trees anywhere, right? Some places are good, some places are not good. So we do that analysis. We check that it's all legal. We check that it matches the standards set by these like third-party verifiers in the voluntary carbon market, who are basically there to, be the police and make sure that what people say is happening is really happening. So we do all of that analysis. We support them through their planting. We give them advice on what to plant where. And then we continue to monitor and measure this forest that they planted, right? So in the early years, they're very small, the saplings, but as they grow, we use a combination of satellites and LiDAR, as well as some in-person visits to actually model out how they're growing and then measure that in real time. And then that tells us how many tons of carbon those trees have sequestered. And then we turn around and provide all of that information to the likes of Microsoft, and do everything it takes to generate the credits for the landowner and help them sell it as well.
So tell me how you build to this. I mean, what was in your background? And you talked a little bit about being part of an investment firm or working with an investment firm. How does this idea come to be and how do you build it out?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a couple of elements from my background. One is I got into startups back when I was still doing my undergrad in London, which was, I was an intern at a then small fintech called TransferWise, which then later went on to become Wise and then went public on the London Stock Exchange in 2021. So it's actually quite a big company now. But that really gave me the bug for small early stage companies. So I think that was one thing, this experience of wanting to be engaged in, wanting to build something from the ground up. And I worked in a couple of other startups throughout my career. And I also worked in American Express. So I got a good kind of grounding in the financial services side of the world. And in a way, I think that parallel helped because the voluntary carbon markets historically have had a lot of issues. There's been a lot of maybe not outright fraud, but also some, what might be considered fraud, but some projects where the impact is not as real as it was claimed. And in my head, the comparison, I think, is it's a little bit like the stock markets were in the late 19th century. When you could go in the US and everyone would be selling you like rail company shares, and you would have no idea whether that was a real rail company or a fake one. And so eventually we had rules set in place. We have the SEC, we have like Moody's and these ratings agencies, etc. So the market was standardized. So now that if you go and buy some shares on NASDAQ, like you're pretty certain that it's a real company. So I think that experience and then seeing the challenges of the carbon market, like it taught me that we could bring some of that transparency, some of that regulation and standardization that the financial services world had come through to the carbon markets as well. And that it would probably benefit every side because nobody wins from a fraudulent market. Like, yes, some people make short-term gains, but ultimately everybody loses. And certainly if it's, a market purporting to help the planet, then everybody really loses. So I thought bringing some transparency to that would help. And my co-founder, Christian, also has a similar background. He was in the early team of starting a bank here in Estonia. So I had a lot of similar experiences. And so we thought, we can bring some more transparency. We can do stuff in a really trustworthy way and kind of show the way. And we also believe there would be new regulation coming. So there would be it would help those project developers like ourselves stand out who can live up to the regulation.
Okay, so I'm understanding the process, the economics. Now, you're using predictive technology or software for certain parts of it. Do you look at parts of the world that require this more, or that not offenders, but that yeah, are creating more carbon
Mm,
perhaps than their share? And then can you target that, or how does that relationship work?
yeah, I think that's also really interesting because if you look at historical emitters, it's all the countries that went through the Industrial Revolution first and still tends to be the rich countries do the bulk of the emissions.
Hmm.
And then historically, a lot of carbon projects actually took place in kind of the global south, in much poorer countries, which has a lot of, some of it is very good. There's a lot of community benefits. But some of it can be seen a little bit like shipping this problem away to someone else to deal with, right? So part of the reason, so Arbonics operates in Europe within the EU, and big reason for why we do that is we wanted to build carbon projects close to where the actual companies who are likely
Yeah.
to buy the credits are. So we still think they should continue to support projects in the global south, but that's much more of a kind of a, I guess, social benefit thing. But for carbon removal and particularly forest-based, you also have side benefits like biodiversity. We think you should be supporting that as close to where your operations are as possible. So that's why we chose to operate in Europe. But there will always be limitations. So we work with landowners across the north and east of Europe, but
Hmm.
there are countries that we likely won't be expanding to, like the Netherlands, because every inch of land in the Netherlands is already intensely used. They have the same amount of land as we have here in Estonia, but they have 15 times more people. So, there are countries where it's very hard to find extra space to plant new forests. So you might always have a little bit of a geographical mismatch, but we're trying to bring it as close to home as possible.
Very cool. I love what's doing. And how do you think, I mean, ultimately, how does this help to contribute, or to contribute to solutioning the climate crisis? Is it going to have a major impact? Is it just a little bit of an increment, or?
I think it's very important to be very upfront and say this is not a silver bullet. Nothing is a silver bullet,
Mhm.
right? The climate crisis is a multi challenge that requires a lot of different things done at the same time. But I do think the scale of impact that nature can have is actually quite significant and maybe somewhat underestimated. So I mentioned earlier, 50 gigatons, that's 50 billion tons of emissions a year, 2 gigatons of removal, 99.98% of that happening through nature today. And so there are a few scientific studies that suggest that 2 gigaton nature-based removal could be scaled up to potentially as much as 10 a year. So that would still only be 1/5 of the emissions, right? So we need to bring emissions
Mhm.
down and do a bunch of other things alongside. But I do think that's quite a significant. We could increase the impact that nature is having today by about 5x, and a lot of this is about being more efficient. And just to give you another example of this, again, I said we operate in Europe. In Europe, we think there's about 14 million hectares of land that could be reforested. And the very good next question might be, why is this land just sitting empty? Like, surely there's a good use for it. And if you look at European history, there were a few massive explosions of population, like during the Industrial Revolution. Um, a lot of forest land was cleared for farms to generate more food for that population. We have since learned to be a lot more efficient in growing food, so farm yields have gone up, and there is a bunch of marginal land that is no longer beneficial to keep as farmland and should probably go back to being forest lands. So that's one example of how we can apply kind of modern technology and analysis to something like nature, which is pretty, the
Right.
trees themselves have pretty much grown the same way for 370 million years. So you're not really changing the trees, but you are getting maybe smarter about where you might plant them and where you might just help nature along a little bit.
How does your digital twin technology contribute to that?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, you don't want to just be sticking a tree in the ground anywhere. And I think that's very important. And those 14 million hectares in Europe, you have to actually find them. Not every piece of land is suitable. So what we've built is for all the countries where we're live, we've built this tool that takes in a lot of different data sources, some from the government, some from places like satellites, of anything from the legal boundaries of different land units all the way through to what the soil composition is. And essentially, what that allows us to do is very quickly check two things. One is this land eligible and suitable for reforesting? It might not be, right? Maybe it's under protection. Maybe it's got a specific type of soil that you should leave well enough alone. Maybe it's actually really high quality farmland. It's better used as farmland. But it does help you identify those lots, pieces of land that are suitable. And then the second thing it does, it uses the soil information and what else we know about the land to model out how much a potential forest planted there could grow and how much carbon it could store. And it goes a step further, actually saying what type of tree species you should plant there and what kind of combinations. Because again, depending on the soil, different type of trees will do, some will thrive, some will not. So the digital twin basically allows us to model out where you should be planting and what you should be planting and how it might grow in the future. And then we supplement that with a lot of actual on the ground data as well.
So the one thing that sort of keeps hitting me as you talk about this, and I'm thinking about your investment background and going into pitch an angel, a private equity, whoever it is, they're looking for, as we like to say in Canada, the hockey stick. I don't know if everybody uses that. As a 30-year entrepreneur, I think it's absolutely ridiculous because you can't scale a company overnight. But when I listen to your model, it takes you, what, 50, 60, 80 years to reforest. So how does this become attractive, or why is this attractive to the investment community? Because you might not be around to see some of the real heavy duty outputs of what you're seeding today, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. For the trees to reach maturity, it will take
Hmm.
many, many decades. But they start removing carbon when they're still very small, right? So
Okay.
it's just at a different rate. And actually, the fastest rate of growth and the fastest rate of carbon removal is often somewhere between year 7 and year 15, when they're really, I guess it's a bit like human children, they really hit a new
Hmm.
height curve at that point. So the carbon removal does kick in already. But yeah, I think in general, forestry investments tend to be measured in decades, not in months or even years. So it is a different mindset. It requires maybe a little bit more patient capital. But in a way, the carbon element there is a way to bridge, kind of as I mentioned earlier, right? If you're waiting for your pure timber returns, you are going to be waiting a very long time. The carbon element helps bring some of that return earlier, which then does make the investment more attractive on the upfront. But then also, I think there's no getting around that a business like ours is also hugely a mission driven and impact driven business. And a lot of the investors behind us have a similar mindset, which is like, yes, they want this to be a functioning business, but they also really believe in, nature restoration and investing in natural capital assets. And so I do think that mission driven piece is sort of entwined there. If someone was looking for just pure super fast return, they'd probably just be investing in AI.
Understood, and thank you for that. So, our time is nearly up. It goes so quickly. I've been speaking with Lisett Luik, co-founder of Arbonics, platform working to build a new forest economy. Where does this go? Just to finish up, where does this go, the new forest economy and Arbonics' place in it, and where does it grow to? How does it grow?
Well, we have big ambitions. We would hope to eventually reach 1 gigaton of total carbon removals through our actions. That's quite a lot of trees. That's a lot of work. We're at 2 megatons projected impact now, so we have a little ways to go. I think broadening it out from Arbonics specifically, my big belief is that the work that we're doing and other people in the space are doing helps us maybe recalibrate some of the value of nature. I think for a long time, people have been we all know it's good, but it's hard to actually, if no one can quantify it, then this good often gets left behind when people are looking at other alternatives that have a very clear cash return, right? And so you end up with situations where someone takes a forest down and paves it over and turns it into a parking
Right.
lot. And I'm hoping that the work we're doing makes that less attractive and makes maintaining the nature more attractive. Speaking in the language of the investors, by giving them some return for doing
Right.
the right thing, the good thing.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'm only chuckling because of the old song that you just um,
Yes.
accidentally quoted, Big Yellow Taxi, I think it is. So, um, Lisette, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's been great to hear about your journey from Estonia around the world back and the impact that you're making at Arbonics. So thank you so much for joining us at Say Hi to the Future today.
Thank you for having me. And yeah, it's been a pleasure.